Avery Schmitz, Internet Lawfare, with an episode of Chatter for May 14th, 2023. For today's episode, the Lawfare team decided to cross-post this week's episode of Chatter, a podcast from David Priest and Shane Harris, featuring in-depth discussions with fascinating people at the creative edges of national security. Today's Chatter episode is entitled Politicians and White House Plumbers with Olivia Nuzzi. In the episode, Harris sat down with Olivia to discuss her career, the 2024 presidential election, her new podcast detailing the Watergate scandal, and more. This is Chatter.
This is Chatter. I'm Shane Harris. This week, journalist Olivia Nuzzi on politics and White House plumbers.
I was really fascinated by politics. I watched a lot of late night comedy, and it used to drive me crazy if I didn't get the joke, in like a Letterman monologue or something. And so I really started paying attention to the news in order to be in on the joke.
Yeah.
I remember when I first learned about Watergate that it was such a tiny, stupid thing, and I could not believe that something so minor had snowballed because of their stupidity.
Right, that it broke the
that
dam.
It broke, that it broke everything. I could not believe that. With Trump, he doesn't handle boredom well. Yeah. And instead of horse racing or bocce or something, this is his sport, is fucking with American politics.
Yeah. We're rolling now. We could just use this.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I could do a fancy intro for you, Olivia Nuzzi, or we could just say hi.
Nuzzi. It's Nuzzi.
Nuzzi. What did I say?
Nutsy.
I said Nuzzi. I know how to pronounce your name.
Don't mock me.
Listen, Nuzzi. It's a Nuzzi. Do people mispronounce your name all the time?
Yeah, but there's even dispute within my family about it.
Really?
Yeah. Some people say Nuzzi, and some the Italian way is Nuzzi.
Because it's like TZ, or like the double Z makes it Nuzzi.
Yeah.
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 Okay, fine.
Do people mispronounce your name?
All the time. Actually, you know what they do? They call me Sean.
I called you Sean the other day when I was talking to Ryan.
Well, see?
Yeah.
We've mispronounced each other's names now.
But that's just a different name. It's not a
It's a completely different name. People call me Kyle. No, they don't do that. They don't.
I was thinking, do you look like a Kyle? You don't look like a Kyle.
I don't think so.
No. Yeah.
But you're a podcaster now.
Oh, God, yeah.
You are podcasting the companion to the HBO series White House Plumbers.
Yes.
Which is this great show about these people who redecorate bathrooms in the White House. It's excellent. We're going to talk about all that. You and I go way back.
Yeah, we do. I can't believe. I was thinking when I was coming over here and being very late that I can't believe we ever worked at the Daily Beast. It's such a weird place.
It is a weird place.
It's like Grand Central Station for journalists.
A lot of people went through there. I was there with you, and Jackie Kucinich was there. Noah Shachtman was the editor. Swin Subasang was there. Tim Mack was there now, who's like freelancing for himself in Ukraine.
Nina Strolik at National Geographic.
Will O'Connor. Who's the travel editor now.
Yeah.
Who else went through there? Who are the crazy people?
Scott Bixby.
Yes.
Speaking of crazy people.
John Avalon was the editor for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good time. Let's talk about where you grew up. I want to get to how you got into the business, but
that's like inside the actor's studio.
Yeah, see, right.
Where were you born?
Where's the young Nuzzi from?
Well, I was born in New York, and I was raised in New Jersey, in Red Bank, which is like an hour and 15 minutes from Manhattan.
It's like suburban New Jersey. Yeah. And what was your childhood like growing up?
I was kind of a loner.
Yeah.
And I hated being a child.
I did too.
Yeah, I was very frustrated by that. I felt older then than I feel now, though, definitely. Like I felt very old and sort of weighed down always.
Did you want to hang out with the adults more than the kids?
It's not. It never even occurred to me to like hang out with the kids, you know. But I didn't. I don't know. No one ever really talked to me like I was a kid.
Yeah.
Everyone always sort of related to me as a miniature adult.
Did you get the thing where people would say she's so mature?
Yeah, which I hated that because
Right.
I felt like because you guys are fucked up, so you're like making me that way.
I'm not like you. Let's be clear. I'm nothing like you. Did you want to be a journalist or a writer?
I didn't. I guess I wanted to be a writer. I was going through a box of stuff recently from my mother, and like there was some little, 4th grade or 5th grade thing where I wrote, for my future writer, which I was sort of surprised by because I didn't remember that being a conscious desire.
Like you actually sat down and wrote something intentionally.
I was always writing short stories and writing scripts and writing anything really in any format and sort of trying different things out.
Were your scripts, were they like for like school plays? Or
no,
skits,
they were for sitcoms. I watched a lot of sitcoms. And was sort of, like raised by
what were your favorite
Nick at
ones?
Night.
Oh, yeah.
I Love Lucy.
Okay, classic.
I liked Bewitched. I loved Gilligan's Island.
Oh, wow.
And I feel I don't really like boats to this day because
Really?
of Gilligan's Island.
You're afraid of them?
A 3-hour tour, it could only go wrong.
Yes.
What else?
Did you watch any contemporary shows or did you like the classics?
I watched a lot of television.
Yeah.
I was like really raised by television.
Were you a Three's Company fan?
I loved Three's Company,
great?
of course.
have
I
to
can't
say-
wait to look for like Mrs. Roper
my
in a
God.
couple of years.
I have an idea.
It's been 6 months.
I want to wear some Mr. Farley like ascots.
Yeah, there were a lot of good looks on that show.
I have this idea for a show, which we
Yeah.
should totally do. It'd be an update. There should be a show called The Regal Beagle. And it's just, but it's like you go back and you set it in that era, but you build it around the Regal Beagle.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the bar.
Yeah, a
in
lot
Three's
of
Company.
intrigue.
Yeah, and you could have whole
Yeah.
new characters like Jack could show up,
Yeah.
Larry could be there, whatever. But
Yeah.
you would just build it around that.
Yeah, there should be like a Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it could be a
I loved
6-part limited
Cheers.
series. Did you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I love Cheers. But you don't like Cheers. Why?
I liked Cheers a lot. It was not one that I watched religiously.
I'm looking at you through this thing, and it's weird. It's
Dirty
very.
around, dirty around. Well, Cheers has the Woody Harrelson connection. Which
Oh
you have now,
yeah.
too.
I totally forgot that he was
played
in it.
Woody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny because like he played like he was. It's interesting. They were taking the stereotype of the dumb blonde and making it a man.
Yeah.
Which I think was like totally novel for that era. It was
Radical.
Kind of controversial. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good. It
Loved
was a-
Frasier. Speaking of
Frasier's a
speaking of
great
Cheers.
show.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of dramas when I was young. So like I liked St. Elsewhere,
I've never seen that.
the hospital show. It's very good.
I don't like hospital shows.
Well, it's kind of like if Hill Street Blues were a hospital show. They were on, I think, around the same time anyway. It's not quite like gory like ER. It's like not like hospital room drama. It's more the people in the hospital.
I watched a lot of Law and Order and like procedurals like that.
Yeah.
A lot of Law and Order.
So then, as you grow up, do you think, okay, journalism is for me? How do you land in journalism? Tell us.
We really got sidetracked. Ranking sitcoms. I didn't know any journalists. Nobody in my family had ever had a job, to my knowledge, where like thinking was the primary activity in the job. It was mostly manual labor and hairdressers and waitresses. And my dad worked for the sanitation department in New York. And so it was just not. I never knew that was an option, and then I was really fascinated by politics. I watched a lot of late night comedy, and it used to drive me crazy if I didn't get the joke, in like a Letterman monologue or something. And so I really started paying attention to the news in order to be in on the joke.
Yeah.
And then it was so much more pleasurable to watch comedy when I knew what the hell people were talking about.
Right.
And so I wanted to get involved in local politics, and so when I was in high school,
Still in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, New Jersey. I started volunteering for local campaigns, and it was just the most fun. And at this point, I had like a little blog where I would kind of write little missives about politics.
What year was this?
2009.
Okay.
10.
Yeah.
Probably.
So Obama's in the White House. Blogging is big.
Yeah, and I would write for like Open Salon, and people were so encouraging. People were so nice, and I didn't know what reporting was or what reporting looked like, but I was kind of like, in retrospect, veering towards acts of journalism.
Yeah,
Like I went to
for
like
sure.
a Tea Party meeting and like, pretended like I was volunteering.
You're showing up there like you're like 17 at this
Yeah,
point? Did they think
yeah.
this was strange, or was that like, yeah,
I looked
whatever?
so old. I mean, I looked 25 from
Okay.
the time I was like 13.
And you probably carried yourself not like a
Yeah, so
teenager, more
everyone was always
confident.
shocked to learn how old I was.
Right.
And then I was interning for this local campaign in what was then the Legislative District 11 in central coastal New Jersey, and I had this blog, and this local Republican blogger who had this website called More Monmouth Musings came across my internet presence and asked me if I would be like the dissenting liberal voice for his Republican blog. And I was like, sure. He said he couldn't pay me. And I was like, all right, well, sure. His name is Art Gallagher. And yeah, right. And I wrote a piece that was it was called Carolyn's or Casa Grande's Cowardice.
Oh.
And it was about this Republican legislator who I believe it was that she was refusing to give an answer on whether or not she supported gay marriage.
Okay.
And I thought it was bullshit. And it was.
You had to do real reporting for that too, probably.
Yeah, I don't remember there being real reporting. I think I was just like really just being very bitchy to this woman for a couple hundred words. And then from there, the publisher of an alt weekly in Asbury Park, New Jersey, Dan Jacobson, is called the Tri-City News. He reached out to see if I would become a columnist there. So I started writing about, it's mostly about Chris Christie, and he was sort of, gearing up to be a candidate in 2012, and that was sort of the subtext of his entire governorship at that point.
Right.
So it was a lot of like sort of, I don't know, pop punditry about American politics and the presidential race and the primary.
So did you feel like you were developing a voice at that point?
Yeah, but I realized very, very quickly that I did not have as many opinions as I thought that I did, and I was not ideological the way that I thought that I was. And so I ran out of things to say almost immediately, which of course I was, 18.
Sure.
And I found it, tremendously difficult to come up with opinions. And then I realized, well, I don't have opinions on this stuff. I would need to learn more about it and get more experience. And I thought that maybe I wanted to be a speechwriter. I was still sort of like, do I want to be in politics or writing about it?
Yep.
And then I took an internship with Anthony Weiner's campaign.
Yes. You want to tell that story?
Well, I thought at that point I had freelanced a bit, for like the Huffington Post, which there was no barrier to entry whatsoever to freelance for the Huffington Post
And this
at that time.
exactly. This was a time when basically it was anybody who wanted to do it.
Yeah, that was really the process.
Right,
exactly. There was no
They'll
process.
take all comers. Yeah, exactly.
And then I think like alternate, some like really lefty, I think now largely forgotten types of places.
Right.
And when I applied to be an intern for the Anthony Weiner campaign, I thought, what better place to learn about media and politics at the same time than on this fucking mayoral race.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's no way that they're going to have me because my only experience is writing about politics, so they're going to think that I'm there as a plant. And to my surprise, they immediately emailed me back. I didn't realize that like interns aren't vetted. I thought like, the intern's the most important.
Yes, exactly.
Most important
When
role
will
in
the
this
FBI do my
campaign.
background check?
And they told me to show up to Almond, Anthony Weiner's brother's restaurant in I think the Flatiron District, and to start work.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then I was there, for a very brief period of time. And I think actually right around this time, I was introduced to someone named Paul Carr by Dave Weigel, who was the editor of a publication called NSFW Corp. And they were going to have me do some freelance pieces. And that kind of intersected with my joining the Anthony Weiner campaign.
Right.
So throughout that, I was having conversations with an editor, not thinking I was going to write about it, but I was taking notes.
Right.
And I was leaking a little bit.
A little bit, just a little bit.
Because it was just, it was such a small,
Yeah.
it was a tiny, you were in like a little at one point we were working out of his congressional office, which was it was this tiny little space with just a few people and the candidate, and I couldn't believe the things coming out of people's mouths, and it was just delightful.
Had you ever worked that closely inside a political operation before?
Not with a principal that was important.
Well, and especially one who is as colorful and weird as he is.
So I worked with like the candidates that I'm still friends with from the local campaign that I interned on. I was like the worst intern ever. I was so bad at phone banking and so bad at all of that shit because I have no attention span and no dedication to the cause. I was just like interested. I wasn't like fighting for my life out there.
I'm just here to get material.
I didn't know that, but yeah, in retrospect.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just fascinating. I was totally fascinated by it. And he was such a character.
Totally.
And I was keeping notes just because it was so interesting. And then I believe it was when Sydney Leathers was exposed by BuzzFeed as being a woman that he was having a sexting relationship with. And the campaign was obviously over. Paul Carr, who was my editor at that time, said, I remember he called me and he said, if you don't write about this, you're a bad journalist and I'm a worse editor. And so we decided that it was okay to write about it. So I did a couple little episodic things. He called all the female interns Monica, which I thought was absolutely hilarious and deranged. And people were only working there to really get proximity to Huma for the potential Hillary Clinton campaign. And then I heard from the New York Daily News. I actually heard from Annie Carney, someone that I think we're both friends, who was at the Daily News and had seen some pickup of some of my items and wanted to know if I would write a piece for them.
Wow.
Or I believe she wanted to write a piece, and I said, how about I write a piece?
Okay. I didn't know Annie was that connection to that. Okay.
Yeah, and I met with her for coffee at the Empire Hotel in Lincoln Center.
I love that you're like, I'll write it.
Well, I didn't know. It's funny. I talked to her about this not that long ago, and her telling of like what that was like from her side was so funny because, of course, it seemed insane. There's like this, child writer being like holding a paper hostage. And she introduced me to the political editor there, Joel something, and they told me that my rules were that they weren't going to use my photo. Okay. They weren't going to make this into some sort of like trashy intern reveals all type of thing. But the big thing was I didn't want them to use my photo because I didn't want it to seem like a tabloidy.
Like you were exploiting this.
I also didn't know that the Daily News was a tabloid because my father.
That's interesting.
My father would bring home the New York Post and the New York Daily News every day, and compared to the New York Post, the Daily News seemed like a relatively serious publication.
You just grew up around it,
Yeah, and it didn't occur to me that was a tabloid.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the story. Their edits on it were so infuriating and so brain dead that I really I almost pulled the plug on it and brain dead, pull the plug. Such morbid. Jesus.
I slaughtered them.
Oh, God. But I was really frustrated because I felt like they were turning it into a very silly thing.
Right.
And it was a kind of a serious piece of reporting. I thought it was all about the kind of machinations of the people and why they were working on the campaign.
Well, impressioned as it turns out.
And what they thought of the candidate, which is not much.
Yeah. Right.
And then they contacted me and they asked me for a headshot because, like all of their columnists, they were going to run a small headshot is what they told me. And I kind of, without a second thought, sent it over. My friend Sophia, who's a photographer, had taken a bunch of photos for me. They were actually kind of parody photos where we were doing like what would a female Stephen Colbert look like? And so I got a spray tan and I looked, insane.
Oh, my God.
They asked me for a higher resolution then on the photo, and I thought that was a little weird, but I didn't know anything about this, so I didn't think it was weird enough that I was like, why do they need such a high resolution on this photo? And then I learned later.
You had some other options as well.
Yeah, I learned later that they had a staff meeting where they said, like, we're going to put her on the cover. What are the odds that she sues and goes crazy? And they decided, it's probably going to be good for her career. So fuck it, we'll do it, and we'll roll the dice. Harry Siegel told me that because he was on I think he was on the board, the editorial board. And I woke up, really early because I was waiting for it to come out. I was really excited.
Your byline and everything.
Yeah, and more than that, I woke up to a phone call from my father saying, "Why are you on the cover of the Daily News?"
Get out.
Just very cool and collected. Why are you on the cover of the Daily News?
Oh my God.
And I ran, and I was living in a dorm at Fordham University in Lincoln Center at the time, and I ran out and tried to buy up every paper that I could find on the Upper West Side. I was running up and down the Upper West Side because I was mortified because it looked like it was this photo of me, which transferred horribly to newsprint, and next to a photo of Anthony Weiner. And I believe it said something like Ween Turn or something horrible. And it looked like I was in a sex scandal with him. And below that was a Real Housewife of New Jersey and her husband, and they were going to jail.
Oh my God.
So I was just horrified, and I thought I looked like shit. I looked like I had sold my story and been photographed by a tabloid.
Yeah, you looked like an opportunist.
Yeah, and that was what the initial pickup of the story was, or punditry about the story was sort of like this social climby woman selling her gossip to a tabloid, which is exactly what I wanted to avoid. So I was devastated. And then at about 7 p.m. that day, I started getting all of this incoming from someone named Hunter Walker, who I'd never heard of before. And I was just terrified. Yeah. I had no idea what he wanted to talk to me about, and he didn't say specifically. And I was like, who the fuck is this person? And I didn't know what to do. I just remember shaking.
Where was he at the time?
Talking Points Memo.
Talking Points Memo. Okay.
And I had, I knew what Talking Points Memo was because I watched a lot of MSNBC. And,
sure.
But I was just terrified. And then when I finally spoke to him and he told me why he was calling, I can't remember if we must have been on the phone. And he told me that the campaign communications director had gone on the record to call me a series of absolutely deranged, hilarious names, including, may I?
Of course.
Slutbag, fucking twat, little cunt.
Oh my God.
Definitely called me a bitch. There were all of these.
I knew there were some names, but not that many.
I had never heard slutbag before. And to my knowledge, she may have, Barbara Morgan, who I'm now very good friends with actually, may have coined that term. And I thought it was just delightful. I really genuinely appreciated the creativity. But
she
more
reached
than
deep.
that,
Yeah, she
but
went
more
deep.
than that, I mean, very cynically, I thought, well, this absolves me. I look like an angel now.
Because you're being attacked.
I look like an angel now, and so, I think everyone was very like, oh no, she's being bullied. Is she going to be upset?
Right.
And I took great pride in it. I thought it was great. Hilarious
because you provoked
events.
them as a
no I just well maybe a bit, but I just thought it was so funny. And I thought that the creativity involved was so good, so funny, and I thought it was kind of just a great story and a delightful story, and I felt like, okay, I no longer look like the villain in this situation.
There's some vindication for you in it, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but I was not prepared for how it would turn into. I mean, it really turned into an international story for. I had never experienced anything like it. There were reporters outside my parents' house, just everyone in the world asking me to come on television, go on Good Morning America, go on all of these British and Australian shows, and go on late night. I just kept getting all of this incoming for days and days, and I was very worried about my family. Yeah. And then I realized, oh, they're Italian. I don't have to worry. They locked it down immediately. No one said a word.
Amazing.
And then after I went radio silent because I was afraid that if I talked publicly about it, that it would be very difficult to escape the Anthony Weiner intern thing, which it was for years afterwards, actually. But after 3 days, it was just crickets, which I thought was so fascinating.
You saw from the inside the cycle.
Totally, and it was so fascinating to be written about. I'm really grateful that I had the experience. I was very upset about it for a couple of years after because it was really hard every time I wrote something to overcome the just Anthony Weiner intern, famous for betraying an Anthony Weiner campaign.
Right.
But I'm really grateful because it was just the way in which the logical leaps that people take when they're writing. You went to a school, that means you graduated from the school, or so just a way that
Like things they got wrong about you?
Yeah, but little things that amounted to an incorrect narrative, right? Or just you could see how someone would think, oh, you grew up there, so you were born there, born in this town,
see.
right? And like little things that were it would only matter to me that it was wrong, but I thought it was a really valuable lesson as a reporter.
On that. Yeah,
and it was fascinating too. It was just absolutely fascinating to see how you could just become an avatar and people are talking about you and it literally has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. But it's just so interesting to hear you talk about this because I think one of the things that like very much characterizes the work that you do now, which is really, I mean, people know a lot of the work that you've done on Trump and people in the Trump orbit for these great stories from New York Magazine. Who can? It's like they are assiduously reported, right? And there are times where they are doing crazy shit that even seems outrageous for Rudy Giuliani or Donald Trump. And you read your story and you can tell that you've got it right. It's reported. I mean, you have them saying things. I mean, you have them saying things to you that sometimes are like, why in the world are they saying this? And of course, they do. But like, it strikes me that being in the middle of a media circus yourself and seeing how it's covered probably has instructed you on A, why that's a fascinating story, but B, that you really do need to get it right. Every little detail.
Yeah, I think and if I get the tiniest thing wrong, I'm just devastated by it.
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, thankfully. But it definitely was an important experience.
And you went from there to the Beast, right? From more or
because
less.
Bridgegate happened. And so the timing of that was extraordinarily lucky because there was all of this interest in me from editors and reporters in the New York media scene. And I think a lot of it was just like a curiosity, is this person for real? And and then when Bridgegate happened, I had met all of these different people, or I had, been introduced to people over email, and I was able to turn that into freelancing pretty prolifically.
You were living in New York.
I was living in New York, and I started writing for New York Magazine and for Politico Magazine. Right. Our friend Denise Wills.
That's
me there.
right. That's right. Denise published you there. That's right.
And a New Jersey reporter at the time, Matt Katz, had introduced me to Denise because he didn't have the bandwidth to do some assignment on Christie, and and it was just very lucky.
Yeah, but it's also so much how journalism works, as you know. You're the right place, right time.
Yeah, I happened to have a lot of knowledge about New Jersey politics at like the exact moment where that was very valuable. And from there, I got a full-time job at the Beast.
Yeah, right. Just where we met.
Yeah.
And then you were in Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about White House Plumbers, but I want to talk about Trump a little bit. Okay, so, first of all, he's in the news a little bit today.
He is in the news a little bit today.
Some stuff happened in New York yesterday, and some stuff's going to happen tonight when he is interviewed by Caitlin Collins.
Yeah, New Hampshire.
New Hampshire CNN. He's running. Obviously.
From what?
Like political handicapping and predictions is so lame. But like, if you had to bet right now, like, do you think he'll actually be the nominee?
I'm not a betting woman.
You're not a betting woman? But what needs to happen for him to be the nominee?
I think circumstances right now, even given the E. Jean Carroll decision, are pretty advantageous for him to be the Republican nominee. I think it looks very, very... It's hard to imagine a universe in which he does not become the Republican nominee.
And there's no one really running against him. DeSantis has not said he's running.
No, not yet.
It's getting a little late.
Is it?
I mean, Biden's already announced. Trump is... When did he come down the escalator? What point in the cycle was that?
June 16th, 2015.
Okay, so if we're comparing cycles, DeSantis still has a little bit of time.
I think... I mean, it's difficult, though, right? The first debate is in August. So I think you need to be active. I mean, he's going to Iowa. He's doing the early state visits now that the legislative session is over in Florida, right? DeSantis. So I think we'll probably have an announcement sometime in the next few weeks. But not that they share anything with reporters.
Right. But you've spent so much time thinking about him and talking to him and people in his orbit.
I've spent more time thinking about his brain than he has, certainly.
Right. Well, that's probably true, So why does he want to be president again?
I've asked him about this. I think that he just doesn't know once you ascend to the top of the mountain. I don't think that when you're that old and you've reached whatever heights you wanted to reach, as a public figure, there's no other mountain for him to go after, right? I think the post-presidency is so interesting in general as a subject, right? And now lifespans maybe are longer, and presidents previously at least were getting younger, and there's a lot of runway for someone after that, like Barack Obama or George W. Bush. But with Trump, he doesn't handle boredom well.
Yeah.
And instead of horse racing or taking up bocce or something, this is his sport, is fucking with American politics.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he knows how to adjust to a life in which he's not sitting at a big desk and his office is not Grand Central Station every day.
Right. I think the boredom part is key, right?
I don't think he can tolerate it.
No, he can't sit still.
Yeah, he can't. And he also just needs constant affirmation. He needs attention, and he hasn't really been getting it that much.
Do you think that the potential for let's say he's criminally indicted on J6 or Mar-a-Lago or both, whatever, which seems like a genuinely real possibility.
Again.
Right? Yeah. Is that debilitating, do you think? I mean, from your understanding of Republican politics today?
I kind of think that, if anything, what happened with Bragg sort of seemed to strengthen him. It did strengthen him if you look at the polls for whatever they're worth. I don't know where we stand on polling this time around, right? Polls are polls, right? But I kind of think anything that feeds into his narrative that this is a witch hunt and that they're out for him is probably pretty good for galvanizing his base.
Right. So if he's president again, how do you think about
Jesus Christ?
You just answered the question. I was going to say, how do you think about saddling up again to cover him? I think about this a lot more from the perspective of because I cover the intelligence community, the policy kind of angle of this and all that. How do you think you would cover him and write about him differently?
Yeah.
And I suppose that's going to be true even while he's running. He's the nominee. You're going to be writing about him.
Yeah. My approach in the last year, I've written 3 features about him in the last year, and I think my approach has been slower, if that's possible for me. I've tried much harder to contextualize his speech and to not get, I guess, sort of wound up by the crazy shit that he says, it's you just want to print what he's saying, but and I still want to do that. I still think that's the answer, is just transparency and putting candidates out there and letting them talk, and people are smart enough to go through what they're saying. And obviously fact-checking is important, context is important, but I'm not afraid of allowing a candidate to speak.
Sure.
But I guess I see him more fully now, I think, and I think we all do. And I think that's the big important thing for me, is making sure that I'm not treating him too unseriously, even though he's such an unserious person.
Right. And I think about this from in a newsroom. Where you write and the writing you do, you're expected to have a point of view, right? And to contextualize and to add some sort of dimensionality of the writer to it. And in the news business, we're so trained to just almost act as if we are not the ones actually writing the words and covering him. And it's impossible to write about this man and not in the context of he tried to stop the transition of power, and he's been credibly convicted of sexual assault, and he may be indicted. You come with your history, and that is indelibly part of it.
Well, it makes everything feel so heavy, just from a pure, creative standpoint, right? There's no agile Trump story that you can write. And someone was interviewing me recently, and they were talking to me about my sentence structures, and they were talking about these very long paragraphs I'll do with that are maybe 1 or 2 sentences, which I don't think is a good thing. It's just I was thinking about it because I've never thought about it consciously, and I was just well, I don't know how else to fit in all of the different investigations that are ongoing, all of the different alleged crimes that have been committed, all of the different crazy shit that he has done or that has gone on around him in the last 5-6 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
I don't. It is a run-on sentence.
Absolutely.
It is a run-on thought.
There's no point in trying to run away from it or to hide it or to
No, and you
overlook
have
it.
to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always thinking. I love old magazines and I collect magazines, and I get so infuriated when I'm reading a big, like, ambitious profile in a magazine from the 70s or 80s or something, and I don't know what the hell they're talking about, and I have to be, on Wikipedia or whatever during it, and so I'm always conscious of trying to write things for people who are not, terminally online of this moment and tethered to the news cycle.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of context to add, and it's just this ensemble of characters that is just, no one ever goes away. It's just bloated and growing and growing and growing, and it's like, oh, you thought that you could forget about Michael Cohen or an Omarosa or whoever, and it turns out, no, you cannot, and they will be relevant until he stops being relevant, and there's not enough newsprint in the world.
I wonder if I wonder a lot about how the government will respond to him if he is president again, and how we kind of even grapple with this individual possibly being president again. I also think, and predictions are worthless, I don't think he can be reelected. That's just my prediction now is he can't be reelected.
I don't know. I mean, I
think he can be, but I don't think he will be.
I keep thinking, though, that at the time that he lost the 2020 race, it was impossible to escape the consequences of his presidency every day, even if it was just surface level, even if you were not someone who was who felt that his policies were really bad or that he was an embarrassment. He was everywhere all the time.
Yep.
He was inescapable, and that's not the case right now, right? He's not on Twitter. He's not on cable news 24/7.
Right.
We're not here. You have to look for his statements and his what do they call them? Truths.
Yes, exactly.
Right, you have to look for it.
Right.
I think that's kind of a recipe for, if that continues apace, for people not really remembering viscerally how sick of him they were.
Right. So it's not that he becomes irrelevant. It's just that we don't forget how bad he is.
Yeah, and I mean, right now the Democratic Party,
we forget about he is,
the Democratic Party and the Trump campaign are sort of aligned in attacking Ron DeSantis, and I keep thinking like, is that going to look smart in retrospect?
Right. Maybe we should build him up. But I think clearly Biden thinks he can beat Trump. Right. So
I mean, he's done it once before. Yeah.
I mean, again, that's why my only prediction on saying I don't think he'll be reelected is I think the math is the math and it'll still be tight. But I don't imagine Donald Trump suddenly reversing his failures with college-educated women in, swing districts. And that's going to kind of decide the election again.
No, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. Are you excited about the potential of writing about him again, or does it feel exhausting?
No, it feels utterly exhausting. I mean, I've always
you're the young reporters expended all your opinions.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel. I mean, I feel like I have to see him through as a story.
Yeah.
When I signed on to start writing about him at the Daily Beast in 2014, I did not think that it was going to be a decade, a third of my life, right? But I feel very much like a sense of duty about it, and like I have to see it through. I cannot abandon the story before it's concluded.
Yeah. Well, I think that yours is also a unique voice writing about him. And so It's like we want to read what you have to say.
But that last piece I did about him, I guess the last piece I did about him was really about Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
But the story before that was about him sort of in isolation at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, my God, the Norma Desmond story.
The Norma Desmond.
I love that story so much. My God. No, but it really is, Olivia. It's like the perfect analogy.
It's crazy.
I'm
not the first person to make that comparison, obviously.
But it's but I mean, when you think about it, like him just like sitting down there, in the dark. Like, oh, my God. With a dead monkey someplace.
Oh, God.
Okay, not that part. But it is that craving. It's that yearning.
It killed me, though, to write that piece.
Why?
It was like, because it's just so heavy. It's so much has happened, and and also the reporting is just, it's so joyless and so, not that it should be fun to report on these things or anything like that, but it is such agony to have to do the reporting, like I found myself just being like, oh fuck, I don't want to call this. I do not want to speak to this person. Right. I do not want to speak to this person. Then you have to say, oh hi,
it's me.
Hey,
How you been?
Oh great. Yeah, no, I've been great. Thank you. Yeah, that's great to talk to you too. Yeah,
it's so much fun.
Yeah. So that, I mean, it's painful.
Yeah,
it's painful.
So it's kind of a good transition to talk about Watergate and White House Plumbers. I wonder, like, when you think about having to put yourself back in the mindset of thinking about the Nixon era, which really, I mean, I think is the last time. I mean, you could take Iran-Contra as a period of scandal, but like really, and Monica Gate and whatever, but really, since Trump, the only comparable figure has been Nixon in terms of just the scandals, the corruption, et cetera, the impeachment. So when you're thinking about how to talk about Watergate, do you have Trump in mind, or does it seem like an era ago and something that is kind of like, what connections come up for you?
Yeah, I think like the small ball nature of it is it's impossible to not think of Trump. Like I remember when I first learned about Watergate, it taking me like 7 tries to finally comprehend that all that it was the break-in, and like they just were idiots, and it was such a tiny little stupid thing, and I could not believe that something so minor had snowballed because of their stupidity.
Right, that it broke
that it broke everything. I could not believe that.
Yeah.
And that sort of just stunning, awe-inspiring stupidity, and just the completely psychotic ideological commitment and sort of religious commitment to a leader, I think is very reminiscent of Trump.
And the show White House Plumbers, which is, I mean, it focuses on G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, right? As sort of these two characters.
2 men with initials in their names. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's kind of, it's using them as the vehicle for telling a story about Watergate. How do you think that the way they're doing it on the show and what you want to do on the companion podcast is like approaching Watergate in a way that maybe people aren't as familiar with? Or
I think it's fascinating because it's really about these 2 men and their relationship and their families. Mostly about E. Howard Hunt's family. There's less about Liddy's family, but the stuff about Liddy's family is fascinating. But I think it's such an interesting way into the story, not just because HBO is paying me to be interested in it, but it's just, I mean, that's what I love in storytelling is finding the human angle, as we would, finding the character, finding what do these people do when they go home, what isn't like at home. That's fascinating to me. How are you processing this privately? What effect has it had on your family and your relationships? All of that to me is like the most interesting stuff of any political scandal or any political drama. So that angle, I think, is really fascinating.
And a lot of what you're doing in the podcast, it seems, is trying to unpack that too, right? And understand the people and explain like how the writers came to them.
Yeah, and it's like, I think any subject that feels like it's been covered to death, that we've had every angle on, when there is a novel way in, I'm very fascinated by how the idea is formed and how they decide to approach it. And it's this sort of unusual mix of like buddy comedy and family tragedy that I think is really interesting. I mean, I am the target audience, but I do think it's very interesting. I thought Dave Mandel did a really great job.
He's on the first episode of your podcast, right, talking about kind of how he went about creating the show. And it was, do I have this right, that it's his father who hooked him up with...
That's Dave Burnett, who's a producer on the show.
Who hooked him up with Bud Crow, or Eagle Crow. Who was telling him this story, like, no, really? Like, I mean, it's a story that people kind of knew, but an angle that nobody had taken by telling it through the story of Liddy and Hunt. Yeah,
in Burnett's telling... basically his dad, who this does seem to be true anecdotally, I've now met his dad a few times, he has just a million ideas for TV shows, and like they're all always horrible, and then this one time he pitched him, and it's like, oh, that is a great idea, that's a great idea for a show. And Dave Mandel is the director who, of course, from Veep, and Seinfeld, and
which seems like a very good sensibility to be bringing to the subject.
Definitely. I love thinking though about like what would Watergate have been like with the cast of Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think, well, and to that point too, it's like it's been said many times now, but like the show that actually is Washington is not House of Cards; it's Veep.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's
yeah.
Yeah,
well, it's
true.
the absurdity of it, right? And I think you talk about this in the first episode too, and this is true about the Watergate
House
era.
of Cards sometimes.
Well, a little House of Cards.
Thinking about it, yeah.
It's why you used to make this observation that Washington is a small town. And like it was a small town during Watergate, it's still a small town now. And I think that I often am wondering, why does Watergate still resonate? It's more than 50 years ago.
It's like a high school lore, like, oh, remember the time the seniors put the car on the roof?
Exactly. Remember the time they broke into the psychiatrist's office?
Yeah.
What do you think about like why it still looms so large, and it's fascinating. I mean, there's a television show, and you're doing a podcast about Watergate. There's a book that just Garrett Graff, who's your historian and guide, just was a finalist for the Pulitzer.
I think because it's such a human story. Yeah. It's like this story about remarkable smallness in people and human error and just bad judgment and bad morals. That's just kind of endlessly adaptable and fascinating. And like a lot of political intrigue, there are a million different ways to look at it and a million different fascinating characters. I mean, I still think about Slober and the Leon Neyfakh approach to it. And there are things that I'm still learning about Watergate, like Dorothy Hunt, for instance, who comes up a lot in this show. I did not know anything about Dorothy Hunt, and I did not know anything about. I can't spoil anything. I don't know what episode this all. But it. I feel silly to not want to spoil something from something that's like highly Wikipedia-able. But
I don't want to ruin history
don't want to
for
ruin
you.
it, but he
Spoiler,
goes on.
He does resign.
But I've been warned to not ruin anything. But yeah, or even like
Martha Mitchell.
I was going to say Martha Mitchell, The Mouth of the South. Yeah,
I mean,
a documentary.
Oh, it's really good.
No, I didn't think
like
it was good. I didn't
Why?
think they did a great job.
Why was it too short? Well, I will say I felt it was too short, and they didn't have enough room to like do the connective tissue bit.
Yeah,
but I love
montagey.
Okay,
I mean, they don't
that's
have
fair.
her,
That's
so
fair.
it's
That's
they did
fair.
the best they could in that respect. I thought Sally Quinn was great in it, though.
Yeah, good explainer.
I thought she was great.
Can carry it through.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't think it really did her justice as a character. But maybe that's impossible with someone who was not, I don't know.
And in 30 minutes.
A lot of people, it was very short.
It was a short form.
It was short.
Yeah. But to your point, though, it's like some of these characters are so outsized, even for a story as big as Watergate. That is really saying something.
Yeah.
And there are still figures around. I mean, even in Trump orbit. Like
Roger Stone.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, not that he was an essential component of Watergate, although he takes credit for, the sun rising. And he's like ISIS. But he, but the fact that he's, an artifact of American history and also a character affecting ongoing American drama is fascinating.
I mean, and I think that's a good point too about, like, again, why Watergate resonates. I mean, some of these characters are still here. There are journalists that you and I both know who covered that period. I mean, it does.
I was thinking I ran into Bernstein at a party a few months ago, and I wanted to kind of fangirl over his memoir about his early days as a reporter before it kind of ends when he gets to the Washington Post.
Right.
I loved it, and I was sort of gushing about this, and he looks over my shoulder and he said, hold that thought, I gotta go find Woodward. And I just thought, like, what a life. How is it possible that in Washington, all of these years later, decades and decades later, Bernstein is still looking for Woodward in Sally Quinn's house? And I am bearing witness to this now.
God. I think it's just it's both poignant and sad.
Yeah, I felt like Forrest Gump, like.
But this is the small town, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you like that about Washington?
I think it still shocks me because I kind of, all the things that people say about how much better New York is, most of them are correct. But it's not, I always felt like Washington's not nearly as bad as people in New York make it sound like it will be.
For sure.
And there's so much beauty and texture to the city that outside of it you don't hear a lot of appreciation for. But it is small.
Yeah.
It is small. When you don't leave your bubble here, it is suffocatingly small. And in New York, I mean, not to be like compare, but I always just think, if you're like crying on the street in New York or something, no one's going to give a shit.
Right.
If you're crying on the street here, you like Chuck Schumer might emerge and give you a tissue.
Exactly.
It's just a very different.
Yeah. It's both charming and stifling at the same time.
Yeah. It's funny. I brought a lot of. I had some guests with me at the correspondence dinner from Los Angeles, and who I'm working with on a project, and there was a lot of comparing LA and DC because it's very similar.
Very much the same town.
No, it's very similar, right?
Yes.
But the meaningful difference, my producer Gina kept pointing out, was that in LA, no one's really friends when you're out at a party. Whereas here, I mean, we've all survived sometimes literal wars together.
Yes.
When I see you at a party,
Yeah.
I like run across the room to tackle you, right?
Exactly.
And I have so many wonderful friends here, and
real,
even people that I'm not close friends with, you have a bond with usually, right? Because you have experienced this really real shit, meaningful shit together.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of shocked the LA people who were here that weekend, and I thought that was so fascinating.
It's so, and I worked for LA early, and worked in LA. I worked for the government of Los Angeles.
For Hollywood.
Yes, I worked for Hollywood. I worked for Peanuts. I did work for Peanuts. But I worked at a magazine in LA early in my career for about a year, and I'd done an internship at a small film production company when I was in college.
Really?
So
Which one?
it was called, what the hell was it called? Oh, God, wait. Tapestry Films. The two things they were famous for were the producers. One, they did Point Break, the original, and two, they produced all the Olsen twin videos.
Oh, amazing.
Which means they're all like trillionaires now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the time, I was not impressed, but
oh
whatever.
my God.
No,
I still think,
should've been.
they were like little reporters on some of those series.
Yeah.
They did investigations. They wore trench coats. A lot of my aesthetic references come from Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen.
The early years.
The early years. Well, now, of course, they have the row. So
Yeah, exactly.
It's, you can buy a $5,000 trench coat from them if
why
you're
not? And an
so
appropriate
please,
size now, too. But I found both going between LA and Washington, totally, I was like, they're the same place. I mean, they're both one-horse industry towns. They both think that the work that they're doing is the center of the universe and the most important thing. They're absolutely obsessed with image and, celebrity in their different ways.
Yeah.
With clout, it is about who you know.
Yep.
LA, there's much more money, but money is just sort of like kind of like part of the current. That's all.
Right.
It's really about clout, and clout does not necessarily equate to money.
Yeah.
Same as
I
in
think
DC.
the meaningful distinction is like their glamour and aesthetics loom so large, right? And people are so obsessed with that stuff, right? We're here, obviously. It's not a major fixation.
We don't lead with it.
We don't lead with that. And the jargon, all the jargony or just the kind of nicknames for people and first names, where it's like when you're parachuting in, you're like, what the hell are people? Who is Pete? What are you guys talking about? Right. And it takes. I mean, I'm still learning about LA, but like it takes a while to kind of learn the language and the pattern of how people speak.
How do you like the city, LA?
I love it.
Yeah.
I really love LA.
I do too. I hated it when I lived there, but now I like it a lot.
Where did you live?
I lived in Venice.
Why didn't you like it?
Well, it's more that I think it wasn't a particularly thing about Venice. It was more that LA, I mean, it's not a beautiful city per se, and that it's very sprawling and spread out. There are gorgeous parts of it. Mm-hmm. LA is the kind of thing where you kind of have to put the little box around your eyes and just look at some pieces of it. It's not like Washington where you can walk out and there are just expanses of the city that are actually quite designed and beautiful.
And walkable.
Although
Will O'Connor is, our friend Will O'Connor is adamant about walking in LA. And so I've kind of experienced it a little bit with him that way, which is very interesting.
Time.
Yeah. Yeah, I left him in a park to go take an Uber home recently.
I'll see you in 3 hours.
I know.
Across town. But no, I think also I was just at a point in my life, too, when I lived there where I was just very serious and I was just coming out and everything was very weighty. And I think I wanted more of the intellectual climate of Washington. The thing that I didn't understand is that people in LA are also very smart. It's just they don't necessarily present in the same way as, they're in Washington, people want you to know they're smart.
Right.
In LA, people aren't striving.
It's also a baseline here, though, right?
There's a baseline here.
You have to have a certain you at least have to be knowledgeable about what's happening to have a conversation, usually.
That's right. And I think, but it is a town that is genuinely fascinated with this town. This town is also very fascinated by them. I mean, the Correspondence Dinner is kind of like the galactic collision every year where you see that happening. But I think that, what would intrigue me about wanting to come back to Washington, and it took me years to figure this out, it's not so much that I wanted to be in Washington doing a Washington thing. I was just fascinated by the stories that were in Washington. I went to L.A. to be a storyteller because I thought I would work in screenwriting, and that's what I'd always wanted to do. And I realized that, no, actually, it's the drama of this town that actually intrigues me and pulls me in, which is why I just stayed here and did journalism. Now, as I'm older, I love going back to L.A. and spending time there. I like it more than New York.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, which is shocking for me to say.
I would never thought I would have said
I used to joke that, I'll certainly die in New York.
Yeah.
Hopefully no time soon. And I always was sort of thinking, like, I can't wait to get back to New York. I can't wait to get back to New York. And I love New York. And I always feel like a just utter relief when I'm back there.
Yeah.
And I never feel lost or uneasy there. Just, I really have my bearings in New York. But I feel that same relief now when I land in LA.
That's nice.
I love LA.
That's nice.
I really think it's just a great town. I love driving. And I love how,
as a New Yorker, you love driving?
And I love how psychotic the LA drivers are. I think it's, like, amazing. So, yeah.
What do you, in working as you are now with creative people, I don't know if they're literally in Hollywood, but I mean, you're working with, filmmakers now. Do they come to a story like Watergate and a story like Washington kind of like with sets of preconceived notions? I mean, is it baked in, or do they kind of approach it like, let's tell this story anew?
I mean, I think with the White House Plumbers series, which I was not involved with the making of the series, but I think it's clear that, Mandel, the director, had learned a lot from Veep. I mean, they were constantly bringing in experts on, I'm making this up, but, like, I need an expert on the Secret Service. Get me a former agent. And Tammy Haddad would materialize a former agent who would come and brief everybody, or maybe Mitt Romney would come in, or whoever they needed to talk to. He was constantly doing interviews and learning a lot, and so he's really, really plugged into Washington and very knowledgeable about it. And I think that's reflected in kind of how the tone of the show, I think, is very Washington.
You have to have that, right? Otherwise, it's going to come across as phony.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think...
Like, even to a viewer who doesn't know what Washington's really like, when something isn't ringing truthfully.
Right, and it's still just, it's a place, it's an ecosystem, it's a neighborhood, it's a universe of people, and, like, no matter where if you're setting something at a dog show or in, Fargo or wherever, it doesn't matter. It has to feel like a real place with a real community.
Right.
But I don't know that any of the preconceived notions about Washington are necessarily wrong so much as they're incomplete.
Yeah. And I think that, like, you talked about, the smallness and the pettiness of, it was exemplified in Watergate. I don't know that ever goes away. I just think that's endemic to politics.
Yeah.
People making bad decisions.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the things that they want, they're going to have to do some bad things to get them.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I thought was interesting from my producer, Gina, her analysis of Washington was she did not realize how a lot of the people working in more junior positions in a White House or administration are there, but they could really be anywhere else. They could be at, in corporate America. They could be working in fashion. They could be in any sort of similar functionary position in a range of different places. And it's not just true believers. It's not just ideologues. It's not just people whose entire life is about climbing a ladder here. I thought that was kind of fascinating. I think there's a tendency to just sort of flatten any place into stereotypes, into West Wing.
Yeah, they're all ambitious and want to be the chief of staff of the White House.
Yeah, which is not strictly true.
No, I mean, that's such a smart point, too. I mean, I think of, the number of people, too, that I've met here who were, like, in my first 5 years living here, who aren't here anymore. They went off and did something like that. And you look back at their time in Washington, they're like, yeah, I did that thing there, and now I did something similar in New York or Chicago or Nashville or whatever.
But I understand that, too. I mean, do you, or I kind of feel like when you've been in a place for what feels like a chapter, thinking, maybe I want to figure out a different way to communicate.
Yeah. I think it's just like, place. Well, like, I mean, when I met you was when I went to go work at the Beast, was at a point where I was working in magazines. My career was reversed. I started in magazines, then went into daily news. because I wanted something different.
Right.
And I was like, I want to stay here. I want to keep doing journalism, but I want to radically change how I'm doing it and the kind that I'm doing. And like that was easy enough to do.
Right.
I mean, this city does have dimensions and layers and kind of multitudes to it, I think, that way. And it is a media capital. I mean, it's not New York, but it's a major media center. And I think we have so many of these things just kind of in miniature.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Do you like podcasting? Speaking of like now switching into other ways of communicating and telling stories?
I mean, what I like about it is how much more social it feels. I mean, feature writing can be really isolating.
Truly.
And as you well know, and it's just nice to be collaborative. So anything that's not writing alone in a room is great fun to me.
Because you're writing, you're working from home probably all the time, or you're writing at home.
I love writing at home. Don't get me wrong, or I'm in a hotel. And I love writing. So I mean, there was a period of time in the Trump administration when I started working on the project that I'm working on now, which is a series for AMC. I had reached a point in my reporting where I really thought I had horrible writer's block, and I was just devastated by it and having so much trouble just getting a sentence out, whereas it used to just be like off to the races once I started typing. And I was just so perplexed and sad about it, and then I realized, I don't have writer's block. I have a I don't want to talk to these people anymore block, and I'm tired of these people block. I'm tired of this reporting block, and so I started writing it as what I thought would be like I thought I would release like maybe an anonymous novel like Primary Colors, and I realized I don't hate writing. I love writing. So I don't mind being alone writing. But it's very nice to break that up with any kind of creative collaborative thing.
So does this mean if he's reelected, you're like, no, I'm not writing about you anymore?
No, I have to do it. I have to do it.
You do, okay. Because you did say you feel like it's a mission.
I have to see it through.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know that I could do the kind of daily, not that I was ever doing a daily grind, but I was there most days.
You have to pay attention to it every day.
Yeah, and I was there most days. Right. I mean, my entire waking life, like yours was probably, was waking up, reading the news, listening to the news when I reached a I can't read anymore block, or just in piles and piles of books that were coming out that were relevant to what we were covering, and just it was ceaseless. Every day, all day, until I went to sleep. Yeah,
it's completely exhausting.
Yeah,
in a way
that
a
fire hose.
No, totally. And I would try to tell even like reporters who I work with who never covered another White House. I was like, this is so abnormal. I mean, it's a busy job covering any administration.
It's been shocking the transition to Biden for me because
it's just like it's a livable life. Basically.
I mean, I knew it wasn't normal, right? But I had never experienced normalcy.
Right.
So even if I'm like, well, this doesn't seem right.
Right. No, totally.
It's still I had nothing to compare it to. But thankfully at the White House, there's so many like lifers there, and so many people among the photographers and producers who have been there since Carter.
Yeah, exactly.
I can talk about it. Since Watergate.
I'm with you though. Like I had this debate with like Joe and I talked about this where. I was like, if he were reelected, I'm like, am I really, like, could I do 4 more years of this? And I was kind of a mindset of like, I think it's just so exhausting and I don't know if I want to do it. And I changed my mind on that. I'm like, it's like, A, it's a great story, but B, it's like, if I don't do what I'm doing, who else is going to do that job?
Well, I also keep thinking, I was having a conversation with a reporter who was interviewing me about something related to Trump. And obviously a younger reporter or just a green reporter, and this person had no knowledge, seemingly, of a lot of basic shit that had happened in the Trump administration, or just dynamics. Not like no knowledge of what, but just like no memory of what the briefings were like, no memory of the experience of it. And how could you if you didn't experience it? It was just something coming by on your screen, right? Sure. And I just was thinking like, oh boy, oh no, we really need people who remember stuff personally to be reporting on this.
Completely. And I think and you and I have learned from people like that. So of course. You have to stay on the job and just continue doing it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, but hopefully it won't be that exhausting. We're going to see what happens. Well, our tradition on the show here is my last question
As
I get to reach into the chatter box.
Beautiful.
Isn't
Wait,
so
did Joe
pretty?
make it?
No, he did not make this. He could have, though. Well,
Yeah.
it would have been even nicer. And I'm going to pull out a random question that's been previously typed down for you. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is a good one. I like this for you. I like this for you. I like this for you. In what country other than your own, as in here, would you most like to live and why?
I guess Italy.
Yeah. You seem non-committal about that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, I guess I would want to live in Italy.
Yeah. Do you speak Italian?
No, I really want to learn.
Yeah.
I want to get a tutor to learn because I tried doing it like with Duolingo or whatever,
Yeah.
and it didn't take at all.
Yeah.
With all the phrases that you would never use. You know, the boy has an apple. But I really want to learn, and Ryan and I want to get married there, so I want to learn before we do that, so that it's not.
Do you know where your people come from?
Bari and Avellino.
Oh, nice.
And Ryan's family's from Benevento.
Okay.
It's sort of nearby Avellino, which makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
Are we related?
Yeah. It's possible. That's not Italian.
But
where are you going to get married in Italy?
I don't know yet. We're not totally sure. Probably we got engaged in Capri, so maybe back there.
Yeah. So Italy.
Yeah.
That'll work.
I think so.
You could cover, there's lots of Italian
Well,
politics.
right after we got engaged, and the next day we went to cover the election there.
It's so romantic.
It was so romantic. It was, though.
Two political reporters.
We just really wanted to, you know. Oh, there's a rally. Let's go.
It's like you want to believe at the end of the day, it's like you just kick back and talk about anything other than politics, but it's
either
all
movies
politics.
or politics. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Well, my friend Olivia Nuzzi, thank you for coming over here today.
Thank you for
having me. This
having
has been fun.
Yeah.
We caused a little trouble.
A little? I feel like we didn't.
We could do more.
Yeah. I feel like we didn't.
Any shit you want to talk real quick before we say goodbye? That was Chatter, a production of Lawfare and Goat Rodeo. Please subscribe to the podcast and find us on Twitter @ThatWasChatter.